from top to bottom. You don't have to draw them that size, just as long as they're perfect squares. I'm going to add one line now just to get started. Okay, so I've added this horizontal line that is a little more than 1/3 of the space from top to bottom. Actually, it's under 3 centimeters or a little more than an inch. And this is going to divide the space into the upper lip and the lower lip. Now, I'm going to go ahead and in time-lapse add some of the basic guidelines that define the shape of the lip. Okay, so if you look at the squares, these various shapes can help you to get these lines into the right place. Because the lips are turning in this 3/4 point of view, the real center of the lips is shifted over to one side. And so you can see how this line comes right up to here, and that tells you where the top comes to a stop there, sort of dips and comes back down. And again, because of the turning of the face, the curve of the lip takes an unusual shape where it's sort of more curved here and more of a gradual movement there. Now I've added the far edge of the mouth itself over here, comes outside of these squares. This one is actually going to stay pretty much within the square itself. Maybe I'll go ahead and start in real time. Defining this central line, which is really quite subtle. For parts of it, it actually follows very closely to that first line that I put down there. So I'm just going to kind of go in there and darken that line in a bit. But towards the edges is where it deviates and dips down just a little bit. I do want to apologize today. I've got a slight cold, so if I sound weird or if I have to pause every once in a while to sneeze or do something embarrassing like that, please forgive me in advance. But we are not going to, miss doing a video for you guys just because of a silly little cold. Now, what I'm going to do is add just a little slight opening here. The last time I did the video of the mouth, I had pretty wide open and you saw the teeth. This time it's going to be just very slightly parted, and that part comes over in this square over here on the right hand side. Now I'm going to, in time-lapse, erase these basic guidelines, and we're going to move on to doing some more of the details in terms of indicating the surface of the lips. Alright, so we got all the lines where we need them to be, we've erased the guidelines, and it's time to get into more of the details. Now I'm going to let you know right now that it is about 9 a.m. as I'm doing this drawing. And the reason I'm telling you that is I want you to understand how much time it takes me to do this particular illustration. A lot of this is going to be about the shading. And sometimes, if I don't tell you how long these things take, there may be the illusion that I'm able to do this stuff faster than I really am able to do. So anyway, I'm starting by adding some curved vertical lines that are going to later on give us a sense of the texture of the lips. I was looking at that earlier video that I did, and I was happy with it. It seemed pretty popular, but I thought that it didn't really do justice to the texture of the surface of the lips, especially considering we've zoomed in so much. If you look at a photograph where they've zoomed in on the lips, you do see a lot of texture. And so I'm going to be focusing a little more on this. Now notice the direction in which these lines curve, because it's turned off to one side. Most of the curves are going to be, especially over here, going to be curving in this direction. Now as we come over here, it is going to begin to be less curved, and it's going to reach a point where it's kind of a more straight line, maybe a little diagonal, and then very slight curves as it comes off here to the left. So anyway, this is just helps give the sense of the form of the lips, and if you get the straightness and sort of curviness of these lines over here, you're going to begin to indicate the full form of the lips, make them look more three-dimensional in the end. And then we're going to kind of do the same thing here with the upper lips. If you go back to, the center of the two squares, I kind of feel like I maybe erased them prematurely, but I think that first line that divided the two squares is a pretty good place for beginning to mark the dividing point between the sort of curving lines of this upper lip as they come over here, and sort of reflecting just as we had done with the lower lip, curving off in this direction. I'm going to put a good number of them. Later on, this is going to become indications of texture. And then as we come across here, it begins to curve off in the opposite direction. Now this, doing a drawing of the lips is mostly about shading. And so at this stage, we are already almost done with the line work, and it's going to begin to be all about my techniques for shading and doing, what I always call the final polishing phase. And I have an idea for how I would like to approach this video. I can't do it all real time because I think it is going to take me a couple of hours to do all this shading. But I have an idea to sort of keep the progress even. I want to start adding shading in time-lapse, but then come back at regular intervals, timed intervals. And I thought what I might do is start with, say, like a 20-minute shading period in time-lapse, then come back and talk about what I did during those 20 minutes. And then I can kind of keep coming back at the regular intervals, and then you'll have at least some sense of the pace. But let me do some of this real time here. I'm going to go ahead and start adding a real base shade here. Notice I'm holding my pencil very low to the paper. I'm not concerned with the beauty of final shading. I'm really just sort of getting something down that I know I can build on later on, trying not to obscure those initial curved vertical lines that I did. Although in a way I think those are eventually going to be replaced by more refined lines later on anyway. But just putting down a base gray color here. And in the interest of saving time, I'm going to do time-lapse for doing a similar technique on the lower lip. Alright, so we got kind of an even base gray all across the whole area of the lips, and what I want to do now is begin to darken up the upper lip. Because of the light source coming from above, naturally the shadow is cast on the upper lip, and it's going to get darker all the way across. Now, as I said, this is going to be a little bit of a time-lapse fest. Sadly, there's no way for me to avoid it, but I am going to try this technique of informing you at very regular intervals so that we don't get into... I think the trap that I think I fall into is that an awful lot of stuff happens at the very end. And people will see this fade at the very end between one stage and the final stage, and they're like, whoa, man, a lot happened during that last bit. And I think in order to prevent that from happening, that means doing a lot of time-lapse early on in the video so that I can try this technique or this idea that I've come up with of coming back periodically every 20 minutes, let's say, to do updates and make sure that we don't have that sudden change, which tends to happen. When I, for whatever reason, I find that very final polishing phase can be sort of visually uninteresting to videotape because it's happening so gradually. Anyway, so we're getting the basic shading there, and then there will be corresponding shading going down here at the very bottom of the lip. I'll do more of that later on. Let's move on to other things for now. I want to do at least a few things real time here. Now this upper line here is in many ways just a guideline. Unless someone is wearing really harsh dark red lipstick, you're not going to see such a strong dividing line between the sort of tone of the upper lip and the skin. So I'm erasing away all that hard-won line work, just casting it aside. These are the sacrifices I make as an artist. But yeah, sometimes the line is just there to get you started, and then you get rid of it later on. And especially over here, this line does not need to be there. There is, in a way, a pretty, as I looked at photographs and so forth, there is a pretty strong, almost line, really, here along the lower lip. There it gets dark enough that you see a pretty strong, pronounced dividing line of tone between the lip and the skin below. But certainly over here and over here, again, I said, if as I said, if someone's wearing really dark lipstick, that these rules don't apply. But if they're going for that natural look, then you're not going to see such a bold outline there. Now, I think it's time for me to start beefing up this central line of the mouth itself with my trusty black Prismacolor. Give me a moment, I'll be right back with that. Okay, so the very darkest part of the drawing is indeed the mouth line. And so I'm going in with a black Prismacolor, black colored pencil. And I'm going to darken up this line all the way across, really. And I would say by the end of the video, you're going to see just a very few key places where this black Prismacolor is used, and yet it is crucial getting that contrast between the very darkest parts of the drawing and the more gray-toned, lighter shades. Notice how from this point of view, this three-quarter point of view, you get a sort of a dip down here, and then it cuts back up in a pretty sharp way. You don't really see that over here just because of the angle. And then I guess I'll go ahead and very lightly begin to get a little darkness down here, just to show you that this is the other area, the one other area where you're going to be using, if indeed you want to use my technique, you're going to be using this black Prismacolor to get it really dark later on. And I think we are ready to maybe begin my little crazy idea of doing time-lapse segments, and really in a way timing myself, forcing myself to come back every 20 minutes to explain what it was I did during that little time-lapse segment. So let's give it a try, folks. I'm going to go ahead and do this, and I will be back in 20 minutes to tell you what I did. Okay, so you can see that I devoted most of those 20 minutes to, adding darkness to this area of the upper lip. One thing that I noticed is that, when we were first starting out, I had my pencil very low to the paper, and then as time went on, I was changing the angle, bringing my fingers down closer to the tip, and using these smaller sort of circular motions. And so for me, that helps in terms of, creating a more, how should I say this, solid-looking area of tone. I think the more it's down like this, you're at the beginning stages, you can sort of see every stroke of the pencil and so forth. And when you get to this point, you can begin doing more precise shading. Now, I'm still not into the point of doing texture. That's going to come later. But I'm going to go ahead and kind of, I would think, do more or less the same thing, but now on the lower lip. So I'll see you guys in 20 more minutes. Okay, well, we've still got quite a ways to go here, but what I want to do, I'm going to take a little bit of a break from this 20-minute by 20-minute time-lapse approach and zoom in a little to show you how I can use the eraser almost as a drawing tool to begin indicating some of this texture. Okay, so I've actually switched to a brand new pencil here so as to have the brand new eraser. And I just want to show you a little bit how I am going to begin to erase away in certain key areas. And this relates to those initial lines that I made back at the beginning, those sort of diagonal lines, to begin to indicate the gloss, the shine of the lips. And, this is not final work here. I'm probably going to continue refining this, but I wanted you to at least see the technique that I'm using. And what I'm going to do is later on even add more contrast by darkening in the grays that, fall between these little white spots. But, hopefully you can get the basic idea of how I'm doing this. And I would say in this drawing lesson in particular, the eraser becomes a drawing tool of sorts. And I will, knowing me, I will probably pull out my trusty white gouache at the very end of this process and take these white areas and make them brighter still. But yeah, I wanted you to at least see part of this in real time here, because this is kind of a nifty little technique for beginning to get towards the texture. As I was saying, I wasn't completely happy with the way the texture of the lips came off in that previous video, and so you're going to see me during this next 20-minute little installment continuing to focus on adding texture to these lips. And just to sort of give you a preview of what is to come, the brightest white highlights are going to come here. There's going to be a sort of a secondary reflected light area that comes from below here, maybe some sort of white object, or the white of the sidewalk or something reflecting up and illuminating these lips. And this kind of secondary light source helps to will make the whole drawing look more 3D, a little more sort of photoreal, I suppose. And then maybe the same thing, that same reflected light source, is going to create some highlights up here. Anyway, I think you got the basic idea of this technique, and yeah, we're going to kick it back into time-lapse for 20 more minutes, this time focusing almost exclusively on the texture. Alright, well, hopefully you can start to see my approach to adding texture. It really is key to understand the sort of direction of the skin, and that's why I put those lines in at the beginning. And you're getting these sort of dark valleys that curve up from the line of the mouth itself, and as you come over here, they begin to curve in that opposite direction. And, it's this whole polishing phase that goes on and on and on. Just involves patience and, gradually darkening things for the most part to heighten the contrast, to get that full sense of shadow, especially here on this upper lip. And then occasionally, as I said before, with the eraser, lightening things with reflected light and so forth. And yeah, I would say key to learning how to draw lips in the mouth and almost anything is to look at photo reference. Go do a Google image search or whatever, find photos of lips to start to perceive those details. And that is certainly the key to learning how to draw almost anything, I think, is to allow yourself to look at the real object in real life, or next best thing, photos of that object. Well, let's go ahead and do 20 more minutes, this time adding texture to the lower lip. Alright, well, we're definitely making progress, although I still feel like I have a ways to go with getting the texture on the lips themselves. But I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so working on shading beneath the lip. Sometimes the shading nearby actually is just as important as the shading you're doing on the mouth itself. So let's go ahead and put in another 20 minutes on this. Okay, so you can see that I added some shading here, especially below the lip and over here to the side of the face. And then, I kind of started to get back into adding texture to the upper and lower lip. And, this is the kind of thing where this polishing phase really comes into play. Because, one person might look at this illustration and say, hey, you're done, man. Lay down that pencil, and I'll be back with it. No, I'm not going to do that, because I am going to put in more time to make this look better. And that means another 20 minutes, another 40 minutes. Hey, I'm going to say another 60 minutes, people. I'm going to put another 3 20-minute stints in on this, and hopefully you'll be able to see, as each one of these pass, how I'm able to refine and polish and make this look steadily more and more photorealistic. So let's go ahead and put in another 20 minutes. Alright, so you can see I'm pretty much confining my attention to the lower lip here and just trying to refine as much as I can the little white areas, the little highlights, the reflected light. The more time you take, the more the texture begins to look really solid and real. So I don't know what else I can say, really. I mean, so many little tiny decisions are going into each of these remaining 20-minute periods that it's kind of hard to pick out. I mean, like I could say, for example, you get a little bit of darkness here, and that is creating this crevice by having the little white line next to it. So you have a few of those here along the lower lip, and yeah, that's if you can pay attention to all those little details, you will be rewarded with a much more realistic looking finished illustration. Well, I'm going to hold true to my promise. I'm going to put in 2 more 20-minute stints on this. So let's go ahead and do the first of those 2. Alright, well this time I focused more on the upper lip, and just want to point out that it's never too late to go back in with the black Prismacolor to darken things up, to heighten the contrast. I mean, so much of this is about adjusting darkness levels. I find a lot of stuff that you thought looked dark enough at the beginning of the drawing process, over time you just find that it's starting to look too pale. And in fact, I'm probably going to continue adding darkness to this whole upper lip area, sort of as gently as I can, little by little, to make sure that there's proper contrast between the upper lip and the lower lip. Well, as I said, we got 20 more minutes to go, and I'm feeling optimistic that that's all I need, really, to bring this to conclusion. One last thing we'll do when we come back from that is the white gouache highlights, but otherwise we are ready to take this video home. So thanks a bunch, guys. We'll be right back after 20 more minutes. Alright, well, I think I need to bring this thing to a close, but I'm going to do my last final touches here with the white gouache, and this will hopefully give us one last little touch of realism here that will lift this illustration to a higher level. So, yeah, basically what you've got here in terms of tools is 3 different materials. You've got the ordinary pencil, the graphite pencil. You've got the black Prismacolor, and finally this white gouache. Now, I suppose, theoretically you could just have the white of the page showing through, leave it like that, but I always feel like going in with the white gouache to sort of really, get these super bright whites, and they have sort of crisp outlines. It does something, I think you'll agree, that helps these white highlights pop even more and just sort of remind the eye of real life, what glossy highlights look like in real life. Now I'm going to use time-lapse to just, put on the very last dabs of white paint, and then we'll come back to give you some final words. Alright, well, it's coming up on 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. This video is going to be a little late, and I should admit that I stopped and had lunch. I had to blow my nose a number of times, too many times, I must say. But that gives you some idea of how much time it takes to create an illustration like this. Let me know what you thought about the technique of showing the work in 20-minute increments. I thought it maybe got me about as close as I ever have to showing the final polishing phase in more of an incremental way.